She was my best friend, my sister in everything but blood. I trusted her more than anyone, even with my life savings. But she betrayed me, taking everything I'd worked for to fund her fairy tale wedding. Now, after a messy divorce, she's back in my life, broke, desperate, and begging for help. Sarah and I were inseparable from the moment we met in middle school. She was the bold, outgoing one, while I was quieter, more cautious. Somehow, our personalities balanced each other perfectly. We were like two halves of the same coin, finishing each other's sentences and laughing at inside jokes no one else understood. Over the years, we became each other's constants. In high school, we'd spend hours on the phone dissecting every tiny detail of our days. When Sarah got her first boyfriend, I was the first person she called, giddy and breathless. When they broke up months later, I stayed up all night comforting her with ice cream and bad romantic comedies. She did the same for me when I had my heart broken for the first time. By the time we reached college, we were more like sisters than friends. We shared everything, our secrets, our dreams, and even our fears. "We'll always have each other," Sarah would say, usually after a long, emotional conversation about our futures. And I believed her, without question. Through college, our friendship only deepened. We studied for exams together, crammed into the same tiny dorm room, and pulled all-nighters to finish projects. Sarah's energy was infectious, and she always managed to turn even the most stressful situations into an adventure. When we talked about the future, our plans often revolved around each other. "You'll be my maid of honor," Sarah would say, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "And godmother to my kids." "Deal." "Deal," I'd reply, grinning. "And you'll be mine." After graduation, our paths diverged slightly. I focused on building my career and saving for the future. I'd always been practical, and my goal was to buy a house and establish financial stability before making any big life changes. Sarah, on the other hand, had a different focus. She wanted to find her happily ever after, her Prince Charming and the fairy tale wedding she'd dreamed of since childhood. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We were still close, talking almost every day and meeting up whenever we could. But as time went on, I started to notice subtle differences in how we approached life. I'd talk about saving money or advancing in my job, and Sarah would brush it off, saying things like, "You're always so serious. Loosen up a little. Life's too short to stress about numbers." Her carefree attitude sometimes frustrated me, but I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. Sarah was chasing her dreams in her own way, just like I was chasing mine. Little did I know, her dreams and mine would collide in the worst way possible. Looking back, the warning signs were there all along. Sarah had always been impulsive and had a tendency to focus on the here and now instead of the long term. But I never imagined those traits would lead her to betray me, or that the person I trusted most in the world would become the one to shatter my faith in friendship. I remember the moment Sarah called to tell me she was engaged. It was late at night, and I'd just finished a long shift at work. My phone buzzed, and before I could say hello, she screamed, "I'm getting married." Her excitement was contagious. I couldn't help but laugh as she rambled about how her boyfriend, now fiancé, had proposed during a romantic weekend getaway. "It was perfect," she said, her voice giddy. "I've been waiting for this my whole life." I was genuinely happy for her. Sarah had always dreamed of a fairy tale romance, and now it seemed like she'd found her Prince Charming. "You're going to be my maid of honor, obviously," she said, already planning everything in her head. "And the wedding is going to be absolutely amazing. Just you wait." Over the next few months, Sarah's wedding planning became the center of every conversation. She'd call me at all hours to gush about venues, flowers, and dress fittings. "I found this incredible place," she said one day. "It's got chandeliers, a grand staircase, and this huge garden for the ceremony. It's perfect." "That sounds amazing," I said, but I couldn't help but wonder how she was going to afford it. Sarah wasn't exactly rolling in money. She worked a decent job but had a reputation for spending her paychecks as fast as she earned them. Then came the details, custom invitations, a designer dress, a 10-tier cake. "It's my dream wedding," she'd say whenever I expressed even a hint of concern about the costs. "I'll figure it out. It's not like I'm asking for much." At first, I brushed it off. Sarah had always been a bit extravagant, and I figured she'd scale back once reality set in. But as the weeks passed, it became clear she was diving headfirst into her plans without thinking about how she'd pay for them. "It's just money," she said one evening as we sat in my apartment, scrolling through wedding ideas on her phone. "You can't put a price on memories, right?" I hesitated, not wanting to burst her bubble. Sure, but weddings can get really expensive, I said carefully. Have you thought about setting a budget? Sarah waved me off, laughing. A budget? That's what credit cards are for. Besides, I'll pay it all back eventually. People give you money as wedding gifts, so it'll even out. Her logic didn't sit right with me, but I kept my mouth shut. Sarah was determined to make her dream wedding a reality, no matter what it took. As the months went on, I noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more stressed, her usual carefree attitude giving way to moments of panic. The venue's asking for a bigger deposit, she mentioned one day. And the caterer wants half up front. Ugh, why does everything have to be so expensive? I tried to be supportive, but deep down, I worried about how far she'd go to make her vision come true. She started dropping hints about needing help, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, she was my best friend. What could go wrong? Little did I know, Sarah's dream wedding would soon become my worst nightmare. It was a rainy evening when Sarah knocked on my door, looking completely undone. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, and she clutched a damp tote bag as if it were her lifeline. I don't know what to do, she said as I let her in, her voice shaky. She collapsed onto my couch, burying her face in her hands. The venue's asking for a bigger deposit, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. And I'm already maxing out my credit cards. If I don't pay by the end of the week, they'll cancel my booking. I sat next to her, unsure of what to say. Sarah was always so confident, so sure of herself, that seeing her like this felt surreal. It's going to be okay, I said, trying to comfort her. We'll figure something out. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Sarah looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Could you loan me some money? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. Loan you money? I repeated, more out of shock than anything else. Just until after the wedding, she said quickly, her tone pleading. I swear I'll pay you back. Once we get the wedding gifts and everything, I'll give you every cent. You know I'm good for it. I hesitated, my mind racing. That money wasn't just sitting around, it was my life savings. I'd worked years to build it, picking up extra shifts, skipping vacations, and cutting corners wherever I could. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give me a sense of security, a safety net I could fall back on. But Sarah was my best friend. She was practically family, and seeing her in such distress made it hard to think logically. How much do you need? I asked cautiously. Her face lit up with a mixture of hope and desperation. Just enough to cover the deposit and some other small things, she said vaguely. Maybe a few thousand? My stomach dropped. A few $1,000s wasn't small by any stretch of the imagination. I leaned back, trying to process the request. Sarah, that's a lot of money, I said carefully. Are you sure you'll be able to pay it back? Absolutely, she said, nodding quickly. As soon as the wedding's over, I'll have enough from gifts and maybe even a small loan from my parents to cover everything. You'll get it back, I promise. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that she wouldn't let me down. But something in the pit of my stomach felt off. Still, I couldn't imagine saying no to her. This was Sarah, the person who had been there for me through everything. If I couldn't trust her, who could I trust? Okay, I said finally, my voice hesitant. But we need to set some clear terms. This is a loan, not a gift, and I need to know exactly how you're planning to pay it back. Her relief was immediate and overwhelming. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me." But as I handed over access to my savings, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning I didn't want to hear. You might never see that money again. When I agreed to loan Sarah money, we set clear boundaries. She'd only take what was absolutely necessary to cover the wedding deposit and a few small expenses. Everything would be paid back once the gifts rolled in after the wedding. She assured me it was temporary, and I chose to trust her, even though a part of me felt uneasy. At first, everything seemed fine. Sarah was endlessly grateful, texting me updates about how the deposit had saved her venue booking and how everything was finally coming together. "You're the reason this is happening," she told me during one of our calls. I'll never forget this, I swear. For a while, I believed her. Watching her excitement and relief almost made me feel like I'd done the right thing. But then the bank notifications started coming in. The first charge was larger than I expected, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe the deposit had been higher than she originally thought. Then more charges appeared, thousands of dollars for catering, decorations, even custom-made party favors. My stomach twisted as I logged into my account and saw how much was missing. The balance had dropped drastically, far more than the amount we'd agreed upon. When I called Sarah to confront her, she sounded defensive, but tried to brush it off. "It's all part of the wedding expenses," she said casually. "I told you this was a big deal, right? Don't worry, I've got everything under control." "Under control?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Sarah, this isn't what we agreed to. You're taking way more than you said you would." She sighed, annoyed. "Relax. It's fine. Once the wedding gifts come in, you'll get every penny back. You just have to trust me." Her words didn't reassure me. I'd known Sarah for years, but this version of her felt like a stranger, dismissive, careless, and unwilling to acknowledge the seriousness of what she was doing. As the wedding day drew closer, I realized the full extent of what had happened. Sarah hadn't just borrowed a few $1,000s, she had drained my entire savings account. Every cent I'd spent years working for was gone. The final straw came when I logged into my account one morning and saw a balance of zero. My heart sank as I stared at the screen, disbelief and anger washing over me. When I confronted Sarah again, she sounded more irritated than apologetic. "It's all going to be fine," she insisted. "This is just temporary. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." But her promises started feeling more like excuses, and her reassurances rang hollow. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't put into words. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust we'd built over years of friendship. The wedding day came and went, and I barely attended. Sitting in the back of the ceremony, watching Sarah beam as she walked down the aisle, all I could feel was a gnawing bitterness. She was celebrating the happiest day of her life, funded by the years of hard work I'd poured into my savings. As I left the reception early, avoiding her calls and hugs, one thought echoed in my mind. How could she do this to me? The wedding had come and gone, but the hollow ache in my chest lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the growing realization that Sarah had used me in the worst possible way. Weeks passed without a single mention of repayment, and I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. One evening, I called her, my hands trembling as I dialed. When she picked up, her tone was cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Hey," she chirped. "What's up?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sarah, we need to talk about the money," I said, my voice firm. "You said you'd pay me back after the wedding. It's been weeks, and I haven't seen a cent." Her cheerful tone vanished in an instant, replaced by something cold and defensive. "Look, I don't have it right now," she said. "You need to be patient." "Patient?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Sarah, that was my life savings. I trusted you, and you drained my account. Do you even understand what you've done to me?" Her response hit like a slap to the face. "I didn't force you to give me the money," she said sharply. "You wanted to help me. Don't make this my fault." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You promised you'd only take what you needed," I said, my voice shaking. "You swore you'd pay me back. Instead, you lied to me, and now you're acting like this is my problem." She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I needed that money to make the wedding happen," she said. "And it was worth it. Everyone said it was the best wedding they'd ever been to. You should be happy you helped me make it so perfect." Her words made my blood boil. "Happy?" I said, nearly shouting. "You used me, Sarah. You didn't just borrow money, you stole it. And now you're justifying it like it's no big deal." She didn't apologize. Instead, she doubled down. "It's not like I'm not going to pay you back," she said dismissively. "I just need some time. You're acting like I'm never going to return the money, and that's not fair." I couldn't take it anymore. "Fair?" I snapped. "What's not fair is that I worked for years to save that money, and you spent it like it was yours. What's not fair is that you're living your dream while I'm stuck picking up the pieces of mine." Her face hardened, and her voice grew colder. "You need to calm down," she said. "I'll pay you back when I can. But honestly, if you're this upset, maybe you shouldn't have given me the money in the first place." That was the final straw. "This is the last conversation we're going to have," I said, my voice low and full of anger. "I'm done with you, Sarah. Don't call me until you're ready to make this right." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. That was the last time we spoke for years. Sarah didn't try to reach out, and I didn't chase her for the money. The friendship we'd built over decades was shattered, and the pain of her betrayal stayed with me, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life, but it wasn't easy. Every time I thought about what Sarah had done, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. She hadn't just taken my money. She'd taken my trust, my dreams, and the bond one thought was unbreakable. I told myself I was better off without her, but the wound she left behind was deep, and healing it would take far longer than I'd anticipated. Life didn't stop for me, even though I felt stuck in the aftermath of Sarah's betrayal. My savings were gone, and with them, all the plans I'd spent years working toward. The dream of buying my first house had to be shelved indefinitely. I was back to square one, scrambling to stay afloat. I picked up extra shifts at work, taking on long hours that left me drained. Weekends, once a time to relax and recharge, became just another stretch of grueling effort. Every paycheck felt like a drop in an ocean of what I'd lost. Each time I thought about what Sarah had done, the bitterness resurfaced. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself for trusting her. Meanwhile, Sarah's life, which had seemed so perfect on the surface, began to crack. I learned through mutual friends that her husband wasn't the Prince Charming she'd imagined. He cheated on her multiple times, and their marriage fell apart within 2 years. By the time their divorce was finalized, Sarah had moved back in with her parents, broke and desperate. "She's really struggling," one of our old friends told me during a chance encounter. "I think she's trying to rebuild, but it's bad. She lost everything in the divorce." A small part of me felt vindicated. She'd taken everything from me, and now she was facing the consequences of her own poor choices. It felt like karma catching up with her. But mostly, I felt numb. Hearing about Sarah stirred up feelings I thought I'd buried: anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I told myself I didn't care what happened to her, but the truth was more complicated. The Sarah I'd grown up with, the best friend I'd trusted with my deepest secrets, was gone. The person who replaced her wasn't someone I could ever forgive. Even as I worked to rebuild my life, her name lingered like a shadow. Every time someone mentioned her, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. I avoided mutual friends as much as possible, not wanting to hear updates about her life. Whether she was struggling or thriving didn't matter, I didn't want to know. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, the pain of her betrayal was a wound that refused to fully heal. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the loss of trust, the loss of a friendship that had meant everything to me. I told myself I'd never speak to Sarah again. She was part of my past, and I was determined to keep her there. But deep down, I knew that life had a way of forcing us to face the things we least wanted to confront. I hadn't thought about Sarah in months when my phone rang late one evening. The number wasn't saved, but something in me knew it was her. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was a pause, followed by a shaky, hesitant voice I barely recognized. "It's Sarah," she said, her tone fragile. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help." Her words left me stunned. After everything she'd done, after years of silence, she had the nerve to ask me for help? My initial instinct was to hang up, to protect myself from whatever chaos she was about to drag me into. But something in her voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard before, made me hesitate. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice cold and detached. "I know I don't deserve it," she said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "But I've lost everything. I have no one else to turn to. Please, can we meet? Just to talk." 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her, to unleash the anger and resentment I'd carried for years. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what she wanted, and why she thought she could come to me after all this time. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "But don't expect me to forgive you." We agreed to meet at a small cafe the next afternoon. As I hung up, my stomach churned with a mix of dread and anticipation. When I saw her the next day, I almost didn't recognize her. Sarah had always been vibrant and full of life, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. But the woman sitting at the cafe table looked like a shadow of her former self. Her skin was pale, her hair limp, and her eyes, once so full of confidence, were sunken and tired. She seemed smaller, like the weight of her mistakes had physically diminished her. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes almost immediately. "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I didn't know where else to go." I crossed my arms, keeping my guard up. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She looked down, wringing her hands. "I've made so many mistakes," she said, her voice cracking. I ruined our friendship. I hurt you. And now I've lost everything. My marriage, my savings, my job. I'm barely getting by. Her words stirred a mix of emotions in me, anger, pity, and a deep-seated bitterness that I'd tried to bury. And you thought coming to me was the answer? I asked, my tone sharp. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know I don't deserve it, she said. But I'm trying to fix things. I just need a little help. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. The woman who had stolen my savings and shattered my trust was now begging me for mercy. It was a moment I'd fantasized about for years, but now that it was happening, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt a heavy, uncomfortable weight settling over me. This wasn't a confident, manipulative Sarah I remembered. This was someone who had been broken by her own choices, and she was asking me for something I wasn't sure I could give. The silence between us was heavy as Sarah waited for me to respond. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table. I need help, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Just enough to get back on my feet. Rent, groceries, maybe a little for bills. Please. Her words ignited a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and bitterness swirled in my chest, but so did something softer, something that felt uncomfortably like pity. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Do you even realize what you did to me, Sarah? You didn't just take my money. You stole my future. That savings account was everything I'd worked for. I had plans, dreams, and you destroyed them to fund your fantasy wedding. Why should I help you now? Her face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, she sobbed. I know I don't deserve it. I was selfish and I hurt you. I hate myself for it. But I swear, I'm not that person anymore. I've learned my lesson, and I'm trying to fix things. I shook my head, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Fix things? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. How do you fix taking years of someone's hard work and throwing it away like it meant nothing? Sarah buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know, she admitted, her voice muffled. I can't change what I did, and I'll never be able to make it up to you. But I'm begging you, please, just this once. I don't have anyone else to turn to. Her vulnerability was almost too much to bear. This wasn't the confident, manipulative woman I remembered. She looked broken, lost, and completely at my mercy. For a long time, I didn't say anything. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to deal with the consequences of her choices. Another part of me, the part that remembered the years of friendship we'd shared, wondered if this was an opportunity to finally find closure. You put me in this position once before, I said finally, my voice filled with a quiet intensity. And look where that got me. Why should I believe you won't do it again? Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears. Because I've hit rock bottom, she said, her voice trembling. I have nothing left. My marriage is over, my savings are gone, and I'm drowning in debt. I know I've done terrible things, but I'm trying to be better. I just need a chance. Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't sure I ever would again. But as I looked at her, broken and pleading, I realized I had a decision to make, not just about Sarah, but about the kind of person I wanted to be. Helping her felt like a betrayal of myself, but walking away felt like holding on to a bitterness that had already taken enough from me. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me wondered if giving her a second chance might finally help me let go of the past. Sarah's apology hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had carried the weight of her betrayal like a wound that refused to heal. Seeing her now, broken, vulnerable, and begging for help, stirred emotions I thought I'd buried. Anger, resentment, pity, and even a faint trace of the bond we once shared collided inside me. Part of me wanted to turn her away without a second thought. I wanted her to feel the same pain and helplessness she'd inflicted on me when she drained my savings and shattered my trust. She'd taken so much from me, and the idea of denying her the help she now desperately needed felt like justice. But as I sat there, staring at the woman who had once been my best friend, I couldn't ignore the memories of our past. I remembered the late-night talks, the laughter, and the moments when she'd been my biggest cheerleader. Those memories didn't excuse what she had done, but they reminded me of the person she used to be, the person I had loved like family. After what felt like an eternity, I let out a long sigh. I'll help you this one time, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. Sarah's eyes widened, hope flickering in her tear-streaked face. Thank you, she whispered. I held up a hand to stop her. This isn't about you, I continued. This is about me not becoming like you. I don't want to carry this anger any longer. But let me make one thing clear. This is your second chance. Don't waste it. Her expression shifted to one of gratitude and shame. I won't, she said, her voice trembling. I promise I won't. I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. I'll give you enough to cover your rent and groceries, I said. But that's it. Don't ask me for anything else. This is the last time I'll help you. That evening, I transferred her just enough money to cover her immediate needs. Nothing more, nothing less. Watching the funds leave my account stirred up a mix of emotions. It wasn't the same as the life savings she had stolen, but it still felt like reopening an old wound. As I hit send, I felt a strange sense of closure. I wasn't forgiving her, and I certainly wasn't forgetting what she'd done. But by helping her, I was choosing to let go of the bitterness that had taken up so much space in my heart. This doesn't fix anything between us, I told her when I called to confirm the transfer. I'm doing this because I want to move on, not because I trust you or because I think you deserve it. I understand, she said quietly. And I'm so sorry. For everything. Whether or not she truly meant it didn't matter to me. I wasn't helping her to rebuild our friendship or to give her another chance to hurt me. I was doing it for myself, to prove that I could rise above what she had done and reclaim my peace. As I hung up the phone, I felt lighter. The decision to help her wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own story. True to her word, Sarah didn't contact me again. At first, I braced myself every time my phone buzzed, expecting another plea for help or a broken promise. But the weeks turned into months, and the silence remained. Slowly, I began to relax, the tension that had built up over years of hurt and anger finally starting to dissipate. Helping Sarah hadn't erased the pain she caused, but it had given me a sense of closure I didn't realize I needed. For the first time in a long time, I could think about her without feeling consumed by bitterness. She was no longer a constant presence in my mind, and the hold her betrayal had over me was finally loosening. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I picked up extra shifts, started budgeting more carefully, and even found new ways to save money that I hadn't considered before. Slowly but surely, my savings began to grow again. This time, I was smarter, more cautious. The experience had taught me the value of boundaries and the importance of protecting myself, even from the people I loved. As the years passed, my anger faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of what had happened. Sarah's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point. It forced me to reevaluate not just my relationships, but also my own capacity for resilience. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing her actions or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about choosing to let go of the anger that had held me captive for so long. Holding on to that bitterness had done nothing but weigh me down, and releasing it felt like breaking free from a prison I hadn't realized I was in. Looking back, I could see how much I'd grown. The person who had once handed over her life savings out of blind trust and loyalty was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. One day, while sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of Sarah and me from our college days. We were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, completely carefree. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the friendship we'd lost, but it was quickly replaced by gratitude for the lessons I'd learned. Sarah had been a part of my life for a reason, and though our story ended in betrayal, it didn't have to define me. I wasn't the victim of her actions anymore. I was the person who had risen above them. As I put the photo back in the box, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The chapter with Sarah was closed, and my life was moving forward. Stronger, wiser, and more resilient, I was finally ready to leave the past behind and embrace the future that lay ahead.